come vape with me. I want to continue with talking to beginners about vaping. I've made one video called Vaping, or I think it's just called For Beginners, in which I spoke about buying yourself an ego battery, which looks like that, and I told you there was a small one and a large one, and they were different in how long they lasted. But in actual fact, when I started vaping, I started with something that looked like this. It didn't look like a lookalike. That's the thing I don't like, because it looks like a cigarette. But the ones I started with were from Jack Vapor in Scotland, my nearest supplier, and they were black. And at the end of them, they had what we call a Cartomizer. Now that's a bright yellow Cartomizer on a MIG-SIG battery. Now that's how we started with Cartomizers, and you vape them, and then when the vapor ran out or there was no flavor left, you had to pop off the top, because inside here is padding and wadding, and at the bottom of it there's an electrical coil that when you push the button on the battery, it heats up the wadding and the e-liquid that's soaked into the wadding, and it makes the vapor. Now the problem with these, we had all sorts of ways of putting the e-liquid in there and pushing them down and filling them up, and in my channel I've got loads of videos on how to clean these, how to reuse them, because most of them, even if you have bought a lookalike thing like that, you'll find that this twists off and you can pop the top off and you can refill it with your own liquid. Now it wasn't long before I went off that, because all the time I felt the padding or the wadding was infecting, if you like, the flavor of the e-liquid. So I soon found tanks, and I haven't used a Cartomizer since. So I started on dual coil tanks, but they were just sort of tanks with a Cartomizer inside that sucked up the e-liquid. So really we were still vaping off the padding and the wadding. And then came tanks, real tanks with no padding or wadding in at all. And yesterday I showed you this one on the end of an ego battery, and that's a Cartomizer, and that's the most common. But then we are left with loads of people who have these small devices which do not look like lookalikes, and they have been cursed really with having to use these little Cartomizers. And along came a tank. Kanga makes them. This little tank came from America. This was my first discovery. It came with my my MIG-SIG. It came with my MIG-SIG, and these are absolutely wonderful. It's the only tank I've ever had that has never, ever leaked, and they go on forever. So I use these on the end of my MIG-SIGs. Now the connection on these are 800 or 900, and they don't fit on an ego, and neither do they fit on anything with a 510 connection. But this is a 510 connection. That's an ego battery, and in there is the 510 connection. And the MIG-SIG tanks, because they are a different fitting, do not fit on my 510 connection devices. But I have discovered that Jack Vapor, and Jack Vapor was where I bought my very first device. It was black like that with Cartomizers on the end. But Jack Vapor stock beautiful little tanks that will fit any kind of device that you might have bought that's got an 800 or a 900 fitting on the end. Now, I don't know how to show you the difference. That is the fitting on my MIG-SIG. That was the fitting on my Jack Vapor device. And that is the fitting on the tank. So that screws onto this bit that is protruding. So if you have got a lookalike or a device like this that is protruding there, it's most probable that you can order these little tanks from Jack Vapor, whose service is excellent, who are in the UK and who stock them. So what it would look like then is like that. And you have e-liquid in there, unsullied by padding or wadding. Let me show you the difference. And the difference in vaping experience is vast. So I'm saying, if you're new and you've already bought a device and it sticks out like that, you can buy tanks, little tanks for your batteries like this that will cause your e-liquid to be pure and untouched by padding or wadding. And you can see how much is left there, because in these funny Cartomizers, you could never tell whether it was full or empty, and you had to guess, and you had to wash it and fill it and all sorts of piping about, whereas a tank is much easier. So I'm telling you, if you've already got your device and it's a little cigarette, even if it looks like a cigarette, I mean it's white and you had a Cartomizer on the end, you can buy tanks. If the fitting is like that, go to Jack Vapor. They've got 3 tanks in a pack. Don't say prices here, but I think it's about £10. If you've got a 510 connection, and I don't actually have a 510 connection. Actually, I do have, but it's on a battery that's not here. But anything that goes in, the innies are 510s often, and they will fit these little Kanga tanks, and you can get these little tanks from Cloud9 Vaping, and I think you get 5 in a pack, and those screw in, because you see the outy part is sticking out on that. Let me show you the other, whereas the 8 or 9 is sticking in. So let me show you the difference. That's the outie, that's a 510 connection, and that's the innie, and that, oh God, let me get this right, and that is the 800 or 900 connection. So that one is more unusual, this one is more common, and that on any little device that you have with a 510 connection can move you on from using Cartomizers, which degrade the flavor and they're hard to manage, onto a tank. And I am the tank lady, and I much prefer tanks. Now let me show you the difference in size. These are mini tanks. MIG-SIG tanks and Cloud9 vaping tanks are made by Kanga. I'm not sure who Jack Vapor's tanks are made from, but Jack Vapor's quality is always excellent, and that's the difference. That is the big Clearomizer, and this is the tiny tank next to it. Can you see the difference? There's a whole lot difference in size. I use the little tanks often on the end of my MIG-SIG or a small battery. Have I got one? A 650 mAh battery to go out with, because they're so tiny and so small you can pop them in the pocket and you don't get stabbed in the you-know-what if you bend over. So that's some information about tanks. And one last thing is to be careful of what e-liquid you buy for your tanks. Don't buy an unknown mix at a car boot sale for £1.99 or in a big store which has got one tiny little display unit next to the Ronson lighters or something. Those e-liquids might not be a good quality, and you can ruin your vaping experience if you buy junk. If it's really cheap, it's junk. So keep away from junk. And I hope you enjoy it if you move to tanks. Thanks for vaping with me.